another video, this time on the visual style. I know a lot of you had wondered about how to get the look of the series for some of your own stuff, so yeah, that's what this is about. Today we're going to cover just the basics. I don't think I'm going to go into any like software specifics in this episode. There's a few topics to cover, so I'll do a few videos. This first episode we're just going to cover 3 of the basics. We're going to talk about format, colors, and keying, and these are sort of the foundational principles of the series. There's some other things as well that we'll touch on in there, but let's get going. So let's talk about format first. A common video format that you'll run into is 16:9, and this just refers to the aspect ratio of a screen. Most of the stuff you'll see on YouTube or on streaming platforms, that kind of thing, are set up at 16:9 currently, which means like if you divided this rectangle here into 16 pieces across, 9 pieces down, you'd have a grid, like a 16:9 grid. So it can be any pixel size you want, but 16:9 refers to the proportion. It's a ratio. Trendwatch is not 16:9 though. It is 4:3. 4:3 is more traditional, old school format, I guess. Before HD TV and HD video came along, pretty much everything was 4:3. Again, you can divide the screen into 4 sections horizontally and 3 sections vertically. The funny thing about Trendwatch, my builds, we hear a lot about 4K and 8K and all the people working at huge sizes, and that's great. That has its place. The cute thing about this series is my builds were actually constructed at a 3:4 aspect or 4:3 aspect ratio at 480 by 360 pixels. So laughably small, but there is a reason for that. Here you can see just the difference between a standard 2K, which would be a 1920 by 1080 pixel screen, and then you can see just how small 480 by 360 is. 480 by 360, for the record, is still smaller than the old sort of NTSC 720 by 540 4:3 screens. I know this is getting a bit technical and it's probably boring for a lot of people, but you wanted to know, so here we are. So anyway, the trick with Trendwatch is work at 480 by 360, and then when you go to render, you scale up that render to a more respectable 1440 by 1080. It still maintains the 4:3 aspect ratio, but you get a slightly larger output. And part of this is to take advantage of just some of the compression that an upscale gives you to sort of degrade the image a little bit. Further on, once you upload that to YouTube applies a little bit of compression, so we get some of that magic banding and sort of poor quality imagery from those formats, and that's intentional. So the series very much sort of embraces a lot of those mistakes. I was very intentionally setting out to do things wrong to get the right result, so it's all part of the aesthetic. Just one note about frame rates: the series is at just a nice round 30 frames per second, so no drop frames, none of the 60 frames per second business. I think 30 frames per second just gives it that nice sort of smoother, slightly smoother video look. I do a lot of work at 24 frames per second for film, or 23.976 frames per second for television, and sometimes your animation can get a little bit steppy. If any of you have encountered this, you'll know what I'm talking about. So 30 frames here is a really nice frame rate for the series. So next we're going to talk about colors. And yeah, I do spell colors with a U because this is a Canadian series, so sorry. Here's a color palette of probably the most common colors that you'll see in this series. I'm not talking about gradients right now because you'll get obviously a bunch of different color variations within gradients and whatnot, but these are the absolute core colors that I've used consistently throughout the series. And you can see telegel, you can see the classic white, which I don't really use white in the series at all, not pure white. So in the upper left you see B8, B8, B8. It's actually a bit of a grayish white. It's off white. I find that the pure white it's a much too harsh color. So anyway, these are hex codes. You can punch these in and you'll get the exact colors if you're trying to replicate something. I wanted to talk a little bit about gradients as well. So here we see a solid, I guess. I'm working in After Effects typically. Again, I don't want to go into software. We can talk about that in future episodes, but in After Effects you would create a solid, which is just basically a solid rectangular shape that fills the frame. In this case I've got it filled with gray. And then I've called out two of our hex colors here. There's a black and then a purple color, and we're going to create a gradient. So the default setting for the gradient is black and white. You can see it moving from black at the top to white at the bottom. And what we're going to want to do is just set that white to the purple, which gives us this result. There's these little knots in the gradient controls in After Effects. The software you use may differ, but you can invert those gradients. You can change the directions of them, make them however you want. Typically in Trendwatch, I just leave those knots like above or below each other, so it's always like a top down or bottom up gradation, and just sort of finding that that sweet spot where the color isn't too intense and the blacks aren't too black. I mean, I know it's close to black and I know it's close to pure purple here, but yeah, you'll see what I mean when you get into trying to recreate this stuff. Something I just want to touch on, sometimes you'll see elements that are sitting on top of a gradient, but I'll use another gradient, the same gradient inverted to fill the object that's sitting on top of that background gradient, if you know what I mean. That gives you a little more contrast and a little more pop. You can also see a little bit of a drop shadow, which I'll touch on later. And I think the last thing I wanted to cover in this episode is keying. Keying is absolutely critical to this series. It's definitely one of the foundational principles for getting the look. Again, how you're making Trendwatch videos, if you are, that may vary from software to software. I'll just talk about it from an After Effects perspective. So if anybody doesn't know what keying is, you'll hear about green screens or blue screens. In the old days, those things were sort of photomechanically, you'd shoot an element like a spaceship or something on a blue screen or a green screen, and then you want to remove that green color, so you're left with maybe just that spaceship with a transparent background, or alpha as we call it. So that's all that we're doing here. So what I have here is an element that I was going to use in Eschaton. I didn't quite push it all the way. It's probably some sort of like tech. You can ask me about that in the comments or on Discord, but I'm just using it as an example here. So I pre-rendered it. It's pure black and white. This, by the way, this works with photos or images, black and white photos, or even things with like gradients and whatnot. You can use any colors you want. They don't have to be black and white to start with, but just something high contrast is what we're looking for. So I got this funky, some sort of whatever it is animation, and we're going to key out the black, as in we're going to remove the black from this particular piece of footage. So here you can see the black has been keyed out and we're just left with the white. There's a little bit of artifacting around the edges. If you look very closely, there's a faint black matte line. That's fine. Again, Trendwatch just embraces the errors here, the aliasing, the pixelation. It's all good in my world. We're going to grab one of our hex colors and apply a fill to it, and fill that all the white space. We're going to just turn that into a color so that we can see this a little bit better. So it's starting to look a little bit more like Trendwatch, but what's missing? That's right, it's the drop shadow. Pretty much everything in the series has a drop shadow. That's super key in terms of just making elements pop. Flat graphics on flat graphics or gradients are great and all, but I think what gives it this sort of like retro, almost video production explainer video kind of feel is it's all in the drop shadow. So they're always applied sort of down and to the right. Sometimes they're harsh, often they're softened a little bit. So whatever software you're using, you'll just need to sort of find a balance there and apply that on a case-by-case basis. And because sometimes when you scale an object, the drop shadow scales as well, so you'll need to scale that back up, that kind of thing. So anyway, quick video, kind of boring, obviously, but you wanted to know. So these are the the basics. Once again, you can follow us on Discord, Instagram. I'll put some links in the description to those, and I think I'll probably also put those hex codes in the description as well, so you can grab those. I'll come back with another one of these videos, and some of the other topics that we're going to cover there are things like text, transitions, distortion effects. We're going to cover how I approach the 3D and lighting the 3D, both in After Effects and Cinema 4D, which is what I use. And eventually we'll talk about cameras and that kind of stuff as well. So anyway, hope you got something out of that, and we'll see you later. And if you're interested or care, I do have another YouTube channel where I dump my motion graphics work. I'll put a link to that in the description as well, so check that out. Feel free to follow and sub. It's just stuff. So anyway, thanks.